Emmerdale teased that the peaceful rhythm of village life has masked a web of cunning manipulation, and in the dimly lit corners of the Woolpack and beyond, one name is whispered with both admiration and dread. Kim Tate. Beneath her poised exterior lies a merciless strategist, always calculating, always 3 moves ahead. It was Kim who recognized early the potential in Crowley, a man whose appetite for ill-gotten gains mirrored her own ambition, and set about exploiting him as deftly as any chess grandmaster would exploit a pawn. The first tremors of tension began when Crowley strolled into Emmerdale's oldest pub, pockets jangling with cash stolen from naive victims across the county. His henchmen flanked him, men whose loyalties were bought in gold and held by fear. They eyed Kim warily that evening, mistaking her elegant composure for passivity. She greeted Crowley with a cool smile, the kind that promised civility while hiding a blade. Over a drink, she feigned curiosity about his latest venture, an extortion racket targeting vulnerable business owners, and let him prattle on, oblivious to the trap she was setting. Kim's suspicion had been raised weeks before, when one of Crowley's cronies slipped up in conversation. The man had let fall a name, Belle Dingle, whose caravan had been ransacked, just as her father had begun to suspect a rival within the village. Kim had known instantly that Crowley's network had extended too close to her own sphere of influence. A ruthless protector of her interests, far more ruthless than anyone guessed, she resolved to cut him down to size. In the days that followed, Kim moved with silent precision. She arranged a discreet meeting with one of Crowley's most trusted musclemen, Sean, at a secluded barn on the outskirts of the village. Under the cover of night, she slipped him a thick envelope, half of it cash, the other half photographs and documents exposing Crowley's financial trail. Many of these records had been stolen from Crowley himself, computerized spreadsheets listing the amounts he had drained from his victims, along with dates and locations. Sean's eyes widened as he flipped through the papers. Here was proof that his boss was a liar and a thief, and that a great fortune lay waiting for whoever turned on him. By dawn, word of Kim's bribe had reached Crowley through hushed whispers. He confronted Sean in a rain-slicked alley behind the cafe, seething with fury. "You think you can betray me," he spat, cuffing Sean's face with a vicious backhand. But Sean, emboldened by Kim's money and the promise of protection, stood his ground. He smiled coldly as the rain mixed with the dried blood at the corner of Crowley's lip. "I'm smarter than you give me credit for," he replied. Then he slipped away, vanishing into the mist. Angered and disoriented, Crowley returned to his manor house. An opulent estate that had cost a fortune to furnish and was now at risk of becoming empty. He ransacked his office, frantic, tearing open drawers and scattering files across the polished hardwood floor. His assistant cowered in the doorway as he demanded answers, but no one would speak. The men who had once curtly obeyed every command were now too afraid of reprisal from Kim to lend him aid. The money he'd stashed in offshore accounts seemed to evaporate when he tried to access it. The bank transfers he'd scheduled were blocked by legal holds placed by agents he didn't even know he had. Meanwhile, Kim watched from afar, a faint curve of triumph on her lips. She had orchestrated the perfect counterattack, leaving Crowley crippled and helpless. But she was far from satisfied. Her plan required him to relinquish every last penny, and more importantly, to reveal the names of his collaborators and confessions that would cement her control over every strand of the racket. Kim's emissaries. Joe Tate, her adopted son, and Sean, freshly converted to her cause, received orders with grim solemnity. Joe, whose admiration for Kim had grown into a complicated blend of respect and fear, allowed himself a flicker of pride. He had seen Kim outwit the likes of Donahue and Neville before, but this maneuver against Crowley felt especially satisfying. Crowley, after all, was arrogant, convinced that his ill-gotten gains insulated him from accountability. Kim had just proven him spectacularly wrong. In the hush of early evening, Kim summoned Crowley to an abandoned storeroom behind the haulage yard. He arrived nervously, eyes darting, hands clenched around the handle of a leather briefcase that he believed contained the last of his money. Joe and Sean flanked the doorway, their expressions unreadable under the harsh glare of a single, swinging bulb. "Thank you for coming," Kim said, voice smooth as silk. She stood before him, hands folded, as though they were old friends meeting for tea instead of a tyrant preparing a coup. Crowley swallowed, his confidence fraying. "I hear you've been misplacing funds." Crowley's jaw twitched. "You don't know what you're talking about." Joe stepped forward, flipping open the briefcase. It lay empty. Crowley's eyes widened in panic. "Where is it?" "Paid my associates," Kim said, stepping closer until he could smell the cool tang of her expensive perfume. "After all, they deserve their share for keeping your enterprise running. But you've been a liability." "How dare," Crowley began, but Sean's hand gripped his shoulder like iron. He winced but didn't cry out. He knew better than to struggle. Kim lifted a tablet computer from a nearby crate and tapped the screen, scrolling through a ledger. "Every penny you've taken, from Belle, from Bob, from the retirees at Mill Cottage, we know about it. And every one of them wants restitution." "You lose, Crowley." Crowley's bravado crumbled. He fell to his knees, voice quivering. "Please, Kim. I can get it back. Just give me time." Kim regarded him with a steely gaze that brooked no compromise. "There's no more time. You will tell us everything, accounts, safe houses, names, or your few remaining freedoms will be taken away." For a moment, Crowley's eyes flickered with something like defiance, but the emptiness of his wallet, the absence of his men, and the ruthless calm of Kim's allies crushed his spirit. He slumped, defeated. "Fine," he whispered. "I'll talk." And talk he did. Over the course of several grueling hours, Kim, Joe and Sean extracted every morsel of information from him. Crowley revealed how he'd siphoned off cash from local businesses under threat, which crooked police officers had taken bribes to look the other way, and where he'd hidden ill-gotten gains in secret lockers around Yorkshire. Every confession was another victory for Kim, every detail another weapon to ensure her total dominion over the region's underground. When at last Kim had secured every scrap of intelligence she sought, she gave the signal. Joe and Sean exchanged a glance, knowing exactly what was coming next. Crowley's eyes darted between them as they approached. He tried to speak, but no words would form. Kim's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Thank you, Crowley. You've been quite useful." She turned and strode from the storeroom, leaving him to the mercy of Joe and Sean. In that instant, Crowley realized the true extent of his downfall. Stripped of wealth, stripped of allies, and stripped of dignity, he was at the mercy of the very people he had once sought to control. Within moments, Joe cuffed Crowley to a heavy pipe along one wall, while Sean patted down his pockets, retrieving a stack of bank cards and a small keyring. Joe lifted the keyring, jingling it tauntingly. "These keys open plenty of doors," he said softly, "but not the ones you want anymore." Crowley whimpered as they rifled through his remaining belongings. Each card they took was another nail in his coffin. They found wallets from other victims, illicit ledgers, and a handful of photographs, showing him shaking hands with figures too respectable to be associated with crime. Joe pocketed the incriminating photographs. Sean slid the ledgers into his jacket. As they worked, Joe's admiration for Kim's brilliance battled with the unease stirring in his chest. He had seen the darker side of her ambition before, but never quite like this. Crowley's pleas echoed in the concrete chamber, his voice ragged with fear. "Please, don't do this. I'll go away, I swear." Joe paused, hefting the briefcase thick with Crowley's seized documents. He looked down at Crowley's cowering form and felt a chill. The boy who had once been the outsider, adopted into Kim's world and raised in opulence, now stood as her enforcer. And that knowledge cut him deeper than any blade. He knelt beside Crowley. "You should have known better than to cross Kim Tate," he said quietly. "But you did. And now you'll pay the price." Crowley's eyes brimmed with tears. "I owe you everything," he whispered. "Just let me live." Joe rose, brushing off his jacket. He exchanged a final look with Sean, one that spoke volumes about loyalty, fear, and the unspoken boundary between obedience and horror. Then they left him shackled, a broken man, in the cold storeroom, knowing that Kim would deal with the aftermath. If Crowley survived this night, it would only be to testify against his own network and ensure Kim's unchallenged reign over their shared underworld. Outside, the sky had darkened to a bruised purple, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Joe stepped into the night with Sean at his side, the weight of the evening pressing heavily on his shoulders. He thought of Kim, her calculating smile when she learned of Crowley's downfall, the steely glint in her eyes as she issued her command. He admired her cunning, yes. But as the rain soaked through his coat, he also felt something he could not ignore. The creeping terror of what it might mean to be truly trusted by Kim Tate. If ever he betrayed her or harmed those she held dear, he knew with absolute certainty that death would be the only escape she would grant. And so, as the village lights of Emmerdale flickered in the distance, Joe walked on, the promise of fortune and power tempered by the cold reality of living under Kim Tate's ruthless protection. Under the sullen glow of the early morning, the abandoned storeroom still smelled of damp concrete and crushed hopes. Crowley's ragged breathing echoed off the walls as he lay bound to the cold iron pipe. Outside, the first stirrings of a new day crept over the rooftops of Emmerdale, but inside, time seemed to stand still, suspended between fear and the unspoken promise of what Kim Tate would do next. Joe and Sean emerged into the brittle dawn, their faces drawn with a mixture of triumph and unease. Sean stuffed Crowley's stolen ledgers into his jacket, glancing back only once to see the man's hollowed posture against the wall. "He'll talk," Sean said quietly, as if that alone justified the brutality of the night. Joe nodded, but his jaw remained clenched. In his mind, images of Kim's calm smile haunted him, the way she had watched Crowley unravel, the unyielding steel in her eyes, as she commanded the operation. He had served her loyally, but now the cost of that loyalty weighed heavily on him. They walked through the dew-soaked yard toward Kim's manor, every step stirring up memories of childhood lessons in power and control. Kim was waiting on the terrace, cigarette in hand, her posture as poised and regal as ever. Behind her, the manicured gardens glimmered with dew, betraying no sign of the violence that had transpired just hours before. "Report," she said, flicking the ash into a crystal dish. Sean stammered through the facts: ledgers seized, passwords compromised, Crowley's broken confession. With each detail, Kim's thin smile deepened, as though savoring every last twist of the knife she'd turned in her rival's back. "And Crowley?" Kim asked, voice cool. Joe cleared his throat. "He's compliant. He's given us everything." Kim examined Joe, her gaze settling on him as though testing his mettle. "Good. And the files?" Sean produced a stack of USB sticks. "Here." Kim raised an eyebrow. "Very good." She paused, taking a long drag of her cigarette. "I want those transferred to our secure servers by noon. Then arrange for the insurance payout reversal. I will not have any legal loose ends." "Yes, Kim," Sean replied, turning to go. Joe lingered. He watched as Kim stubbed out her cigarette beneath her heel, crushing it until only the red ember remained. "Everything's settled, then," he ventured. Kim's smile sharpened. "On the contrary, Joe. This is just the beginning. Crowley's network spans further than you realize. There are others who will come sniffing around for him, police of course, but also rival operators who see an opportunity in his downfall. She took his arm, guiding him to the terrace railing. I need you to reach out to some mutual acquaintances. Offer them a choice: join me, or watch their fortunes crumble. Joe swallowed. That sounds risky. Kim's gaze hardened. Risk is part of the game. You know that. She tapped the railing with her fingernail. Go now. I expect a full list of prospects by mid-afternoon. As Joe and Sean departed, Kim turned back toward the dark windows of the manor house. In the recesses of her mind, she was already calculating which alliances to forge and which to sever next. Crowley had been a valuable pawn, but the board extended far beyond him. Late that morning, Joe found Sean at Kim's secure office, an austere room lined with filing cabinets and surveillance monitors. The two men sat before a polished mahogany desk, littered with spreadsheets and phone lists. Joe tapped a pen against the table, uncertainty knotting his stomach. You think she suspects how shaken I am? He asked. Sean glanced up, expression unreadable. Kim doesn't tolerate weakness. But she respects efficiency. Joe exhaled sharply. I'm efficient. Sean chuckled, but it was hollow. For now. Together they began to sift through contacts, small-time crooks, who had grudgingly answered to Crowley, crooked solicitors, even one disgraced former detective, who had pocketed information in return for bribes. Each name represented a potential ally, or enemy. Joe scanned the list, ticking off those he believed could be brought into Kim's fold. The phone rang, startling them both. Sean answered, listened for a moment, then hung up. Devon Mallory, he announced. A local arms broker. He wants in. Joe frowned. Is he trustworthy? Sean shrugged. In our world, trustworthy is a relative term. He's well-connected, though, can source weapons and muscle at a moment's notice. Joe tapped a finger against his lips. We should bring him in. But I'll handle it. Sean nodded. Be careful. Joe left with the list in hand, heart pounding. He knew Kim would want results, and quickly. Failure was not an option. Meanwhile, in the damp basement of an old textile warehouse, Crowley knelt on a thin mat, wrists raw from the restraints. His mind raced through every conceivable escape, every appeal to Joe and Sean's lingering sympathies. Hours dragged by before he heard the thud of footsteps. Your time's up, a cold voice announced. It was Sean. Crowley lifted his head, hope flickering. Please, he croaked, voice hoarse. Tell her I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Sean crouched beside him. She told us to move you to a safer location. That choice of words sent a fresh wave of terror through Crowley's veins. He shook his head, panic rising. I can't move. My legs. Sean gave him a pitying look. You don't have a choice. He unlocked the cuffs and hauled Crowley to his feet. Crowley stumbled, limbs trembling as Sean guided him through the dim corridors. At a side door, they paused. Sean unlocked it, revealing a black SUV idling with its engine low and throbbing. Crowley's eyes widened as a masked man in the passenger seat slid across to unlock his door. This is as much mercy as you get, Sean muttered. Vanished downstate, no chance of tracking. Crowley collapsed into the seat, hands pressed together in a silent plea. As the SUV slid away into the mist, Sean lingered long enough to watch the taillights vanish. Then he turned and strode back toward the warehouse steps. By mid-afternoon, Joe returned to the manor with his list of new recruits. He found Kim in her study, leaning over a large map of Yorkshire, red pins marking key locations. He cleared his throat. Here are the names you asked for. Kim looked up, her eyes alight with interest. Jo placed the list on her desk. She rifled through it, then tapped one name with a long fingernail. Mallory. Good. Arrange a meeting, somewhere discreet. Jo hesitated. I also had a thought. Kim raised an eyebrow. Yes? He swallowed. What about Belle Dingle? She still harbors resentment toward Crowley. If we bring her in, she'll owe us. Kim's lips curved. I like your thinking. Send her an invitation. But make sure she understands the stakes. Jo felt a surge of pride and fear. In Kim's world, every favor carried a hidden price. That evening, Sean met Kim and Jo at the Woolpack, where the scent of hops and hearthfire mingled in the snug. Jo sat on a high stool near the bar. Kim and Sean leaned against a corner table, half in shadow. Sean reported that Crowley had arrived safely, no sign of pursuit. His next assignment, he said quietly, was to oversee distribution of Crowley's seized assets, cars, properties, and shell companies now under Kim's control. Kim nodded approvingly. Excellent. She turned to Jo. And your meeting with Mallory? Jo glanced at the bar mirror, where Belle Dingle's reflection briefly caught his eye as she entered alone. She's here. Belle sat at a small table in the back, nursing a gin and tonic. Jo approached, each step weighted with significance. Belle looked up, suspicion flickering in her eyes. You asked to see me, she said. Jo offered a cautious smile. Kim Tate wants to make amends. Belle laughed bitterly. From the horse's mouth. Jo lowered his voice. We can give you justice against Crowley's network. Protection, restitution. In return, we ask your loyalty. Belle studied him. And if I refuse? Jo's heart pounded, but he met her gaze steady. I'm afraid refusal isn't an option. Outside, as the pub lights glowed behind them, Kim and Sean watched through the window. Kim's expression was unreadable, but Sean felt a chill as he caught her eye. Both knew that soon, Belle would learn exactly how ruthless Kim Tate could be, and that loyalty once sold could not easily be repurchased. The night settled over Emmerdale, rain beginning to patter on the rooftops. In the darkness, alliances were forged in whispered promises and veiled threats. Kim's empire crept outward, built on the ruin of Crowley's downfall and the pliant wills of those who feared her. Jo stood at the edge of that empire, admired, rewarded, yet forever aware that a single misstep could send him tumbling into oblivion. And Sean, who had once only followed orders, now saw that power was as intoxicating as it was dangerous. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Snowballing debts, envious rivals, perhaps a vengeful whisper from Crowley somewhere in the shadows. But for tonight, Kim's web held fast, and the players trembled within its threads. The future of Emmerdale's underworld lay poised on a knife's edge, and none of them could say which way it would fall.